monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
The removal order appeared ordinary at first. Inventory numbers, transportation dates, signatures, and a quiet instruction to clear a forgotten royal apartment. But when Prince William saw whose belongings had been marked for relocation, his expression changed. Princess Margaret's writing desk, private armchairs, family cabinets, and personal keepsakes were about to be carried out of Kensington Palace. Before the first removal van could enter the gates, William issued one uncompromising command: stop everything. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the file again. Kensington Palace, the historic London royal residence, was preparing for renovation, and administrators had approved moving Margaret's private furniture to an off-site storage facility. The future king understood why space and conservation mattered, yet this was not ordinary furniture. Her writing desk, embroidered chairs, bookcases, drinks cabinet, and handwritten seating cards carried the shape of a vanished life. The prince stopped at one phrase: non-essential historic furnishings. His thumb pressed against the page. He remembered how quickly private rooms could be emptied after a royal death, how grief could become labels, crates, and numbers. Diana's belongings had once passed through that same cold machinery, and he knew how easily memory disappeared beneath administrative language. William turned to the consultation page and felt concern harden into anger. David Armstrong Jones and Lady Sarah Chatto, Margaret's children, had not been asked for consent. They appeared only under notification, meaning the family would be told after the operation began. David had protected his mother's artistic legacy, while Sarah guarded quieter memories no archive could explain. Neither had been allowed to speak. Then the timetable caught his eye. The vans were scheduled before sunrise, ahead of public tours, with only a small palace team present. William no longer saw haste. He saw intention. Someone wanted the rooms cleared before resistance could gather. He lifted the telephone and called Palace Operations. "No item leaves those rooms," he said. An official began explaining that transport had already been booked. The future king cut through the excuse. "Then cancel the transport." Silence followed. William looked at the page and noticed a handwritten note beside the Senior Household Committee's approval. That committee, the group overseeing palace operations, accelerated the relocation after an inspection attended by Queen Camilla. She had entered those rooms days earlier. Now her name stood beside a decision threatening to divide Margaret's world forever. William had stopped the vans, but stopping the removal was only the beginning, because he now needed to discover why Margaret's private rooms had suddenly become so important to people who had never called them home. Behind every chair marked for removal stood a person who remembered someone sitting in it. Behind every cabinet was a voice, an argument, a Christmas drink, or a private confession never recorded by historians. William understood that instantly. Others saw available rooms and movable assets. Lady Sarah Chatto saw the remains of her mother's life. King Charles saw the belongings of the aunt who had filled his childhood with glamour and volatility. Camilla saw a palace space awaiting a new purpose. William knew Margaret's children had protected her memory without turning grief into spectacle. Sarah and David Armstrong Jones had never demanded control of Kensington Palace, the historic London residence where several members of the royal family had lived. They simply expected respect before their mother's private possessions were disturbed. The prince also understood Margaret's difficult place inside the monarchy. She had lived close to the crown, yet that closeness had demanded sacrifice, restraint, and years of private disappointment. William called Sarah before palace officials could send their formal notice. The future king carefully explained that the relocation had been stopped, but she barely reacted until he mentioned the writing desk. Silence filled the line. Then Margaret's daughter asked whether anyone had opened its drawers. Sarah was not worried about ownership. She feared that letters, sketches, or unfinished notes might already have been handled by strangers who saw only items on an inventory. Charles received news of his son's intervention while reading official correspondence. The king removed his glasses and looked toward a photograph of Margaret standing beside Queen Elizabeth II, the late monarch and his mother. He remembered his aunt's laughter, her sharp temper, and the strange sadness that often followed both. Yet the modernization program carried his approval, and he knew William's actions could appear to challenge not only palace officials, but his own authority. Camilla's connection to the disputed apartment made the situation more dangerous. The Queen Consort had supported turning underused royal rooms into a hospitality suite for visiting dignitaries and senior relatives. A hospitality suite was simply a formal set of rooms prepared for important guests. She believed the palace needed to remain useful, but her support placed her closer to Margaret's possessions than anyone had realized. Anne warned William not to trust the word efficiency. Princess Anne had seen that language used before, usually when history was about to be broken into manageable pieces. She told her nephew the furniture might only be the first stage. Once the room lost its character, the apartment itself could be reassigned without resistance. Charles finally telephoned Sarah. She did not accuse him. She did not raise her voice. But her composure broke when she whispered, "Those were the last rooms where Mummy still seemed entirely herself." The monarch closed his eyes. Sarah's grief made him understand that damage had already been done, even though nothing had left the palace. David then uncovered something worse. One cabinet had not been listed for ordinary storage. The Earl found it marked for specialist reassessment, meaning experts would decide whether it should be placed elsewhere. He immediately called William, and the prince realized the collection may never have been intended to remain together. The battle was no longer about whether old furniture should remain in an old room. It was about who had the authority to decide which royal memories deserved protection and which could be quietly reassigned. The relocation order had not begun with William, Sarah, or even the renovation committee. It began 3 weeks earlier, during a private inspection that was supposed to last 20 minutes. Camilla entered Princess Margaret's former rooms with 2 household officials and a preservation advisor. By the time she left, a question had been placed on the table. Why should valuable palace space remain frozen around the memory of someone who had been gone for decades? That question changed everything. Camilla had been told the visit concerned heating, damaged fabrics, fire safety, and the wider refurbishment of Kensington Palace. A refurbishment was simply a major program of repair and renewal, but this one carried deeper consequences. Margaret's belongings had remained largely grouped together for years. The apartment was not an official memorial, yet the desk, chairs, cabinets, and books still preserved the emotional shape of the life once lived there. Then one official tied a red relocation tag to Margaret's writing desk. He described it as adaptable for executive use elsewhere, reducing decades of private letters and family memories to a practical asset. The Queen Consort touched the desk and asked whether it might suit a sitting room being redesigned for royal guests. She presented the question calmly. But once spoken, it gave the officials permission to imagine the room emptied. Sarah arrived unexpectedly to examine several of her mother's stored sketches. The moment Lady Sarah Chatto saw the red label, she pulled it free. Her expression remained controlled, but anger sharpened every word. "This is not surplus furniture," Margaret's daughter said. The officials looked toward Camilla, waiting for her response. Camilla insisted that no disrespect had been intended. She argued that the palace could not preserve every private room forever, while buildings needed repair and new functions. Sarah did not raise her voice. She simply replied that preservation and erasure were not the same thing. The Queen Consort held her ground, while Margaret's daughter refused to let administrative language disguise what was happening. 4 days later, the first preservation assessment changed. The original report had advised keeping the principal objects together, but the revised version recommended complete relocation during renovation. Conservation had become operational efficiency, a phrase broad enough to hide almost any decision. A longtime palace curator noticed the alteration and sent William a discreet written message. The warning was direct. Once Margaret's collection entered central storage, individual pieces could be reassigned permanently. The curator had documented the difference between both reports, giving the prince something stronger than suspicion. William studied the 2 versions late into the night. He circled the changed paragraphs, found Sarah's name missing from the consultation record, and understood the truth. This was not temporary protection. It was the possible destruction of the collection as a single personal history. The prince rejected another memorandum. He requested a face-to-face meeting with Charles and Camilla, then ordered the writing desk to remain untouched until they had spoken. The red tag had been removed, but the insult it represented could not be taken back, and when William entered the king's private sitting room, he carried more than a disputed inventory in his hands. No aides sat between them. No committee papers could soften the language. William stood opposite Charles and Camilla, with the relocation order folded in his hand. The king remained seated, but his son did not. For several seconds, only the ticking of a clock filled the room. Then William placed the document on the table and said the sentence that transformed an internal disagreement into a family confrontation. "You cannot clear a life like a storeroom." Charles had expected a discussion about a temporary pause. The monarch believed further consultation could calm the dispute before the renovation continued. William wanted something far stronger: complete cancellation until Margaret's children approved a preservation plan, meaning a formal agreement deciding how her belongings would remain protected and whether they should stay together. Camilla refused to retreat from the practical argument. The Queen Consort said Kensington Palace had to adapt because deteriorating rooms demanded maintenance, security costs continued rising, and unused apartments could not remain untouched whenever painful memories surrounded them. She insisted that responsible change was not the same as disrespect. William listened without moving, but his restraint carried more anger than shouting ever could. The prince opened the order and read the phrase, "Non-essential historic furnishings allowed." He asked who had decided that Margaret's private possessions were non-essential. No one answered immediately. William repeated the question, his voice quieter this time, forcing Charles to confront the cruelty hidden inside those words. Charles felt the accusation strike personally. The king reminded his son that preserving the monarchy required decisions that were often uncomfortable. He would not accept the suggestion that modernization meant he had loved his aunt less. His hand tightened around the chair as William replied that affection meant little if the process treated her children as an inconvenience. Camilla rose. She said she would not sit there and be portrayed as someone raiding a dead woman's rooms. William answered that intentions no longer mattered once Sarah and David were excluded and removal vans were booked before sunrise. The Queen Consort stared at him, wounded and furious, while Charles realized the meeting was slipping beyond administrative disagreement. Then William revealed what he had held back. He placed the original preservation report beside the revised version. The first advised keeping Margaret's principal belongings together. The second removed that warning and recommended complete relocation. Charles studied both pages and asked why the strongest protection against dispersal had vanished. Camilla's anger gave way to genuine shock. She admitted asking whether the rooms could serve a useful purpose, but denied ordering anyone to rewrite professional advice. The Queen Consort understood at once that palace officials may have turned her question into a command, acting quickly because they believed they were serving her wishes. Charles reached for a pen, hesitated, and set it down. The monarch ordered every official involved in revising the report to appear before him the following morning. He would not defend William or Camilla until he knew who had altered the recommendation. As the meeting ended, Camilla delivered one final warning. Blocking the order, she told William, did not prove he possessed the household authority to cancel it. William had won the silence in the room, but the next battle would be fought through signatures, palace powers, and the dangerous question of whether a future king could overrule the present one. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. More often, it appears as a signature placed neatly beneath a recommendation no one expects to be challenged. William's order had stopped the removal teams, but the original authorization remained valid under the king's household. Unless Charles formally withdrew it, the vans could be rescheduled at any moment. The prince had acted with moral certainty, yet the palace now demanded something colder, proof that sentiment, heritage, and family consent carried more weight than administrative command. William understood the limit of his victory. The royal household's property and collection structure, the system responsible for managing royal buildings, furnishings, and historic objects operated under Charles's authority. The future king could close a gate, delay access, and force officials to pause. He could not erase the original approval with a telephone call. Only the monarch could make the cancellation permanent. The preservation argument cut even deeper. Royal collection specialists, the experts responsible for caring for objects held for the crown, could protect every chair and cabinet inside secure storage. Yet survival was not the same as preservation. Margaret's furniture might remain physically untouched, while the private world those pieces created was destroyed forever. Charles confronted the revised report's authors the following morning. The king sat at the head of a narrow table while the officials explained that they had interpreted Camilla's questions as a request for immediate action. He listened without interrupting. Then the monarch asked who had authorized the removal date before Margaret's children were consulted. No one gave him a direct answer. Camilla felt the consequences settle around her. The queen consort realized that her name had given the proposal force, even though she had never issued a formal command. After the officials left, she told Charles that men had spent years anticipating what they believed she wanted, then leaving her to carry the blame when those decisions caused outrage. The king heard the resentment in her voice, but he did not offer the comfort she expected. William feared that silence. The prince suspected his father might choose palace stability over open conflict, and approve a compromise that still removed most of the collection. Anne warned him not to mistake Charles's restraint for support or surrender. The Princess Royal had learned that the most dangerous decisions were often made after everyone believed the crisis had passed. Then Anne uncovered the document no one had mentioned. A secondary redistribution schedule proposed sending selected pieces to residences used by active royals. Margaret's drinks cabinet had been marked for a guest reception room. Her writing desk was listed as a possible addition to a newly renovated private suite. The danger became undeniable. Once each object gained a new purpose, officials could argue that reconstructing Margaret's rooms was impractical. The collection would not merely be stored. It would be scattered until restoration became almost impossible. Anne found William in a quiet corridor and folded the redistribution sheet in half before placing it in his hand. They were not moving a room, she said. They were dissolving it. The prince read the list twice, and his doubt hardened into alarm. Charles still did not sign the cancellation. Instead, the king summoned Lady Sarah Chatto to the palace alone, raising a darker possibility. He might ask Margaret's daughter to accept the compromise William had fought to prevent. The future of those rooms would now depend on Sarah entering the palace, where her mother had once felt both protected and imprisoned, and facing the nephew who now wore the crown. Lady Sarah arrived without lawyers, advisors, or a prepared statement. She carried a small envelope containing a photograph of her mother seated at the disputed desk, laughing over an unfinished letter. Charles had expected a discussion about preservation categories and practical limits. Instead, Margaret's daughter placed the photograph before him and asked one devastating question. "When you look at this, do you see furniture, or do you still see her?" The king did not answer immediately. Charles finally offered the compromise he had prepared. The monarch proposed keeping the most recognizable pieces together, while moving the remaining furnishings into protected storage. A small commemorative display could later acknowledge Margaret's connection to Kensington Palace. Such a display would be a carefully arranged public presentation of selected objects, designed to preserve a simplified version of her story. To the king, it sounded measured. To Sarah, it sounded like reduction. Lady Sarah Chatto explained that her mother could not be represented by 3 attractive objects chosen for visitors. The desk mattered because of the chairs beside it. The cabinets mattered because of the books, letters, and habits surrounding them. Margaret's life existed in the relationship between those belongings, not in isolated pieces stripped of their private meaning. Sarah folded her hands to stop them trembling and said she could not give family consent to breaking the collection apart. The refusal remained polite, but its force was unmistakable. Without Margaret's daughter supporting the plan, the palace could no longer describe the relocation as a respectful family agreement. Charles looked again at the photograph and remembered a telephone call made after Diana's death. His aunt had spoken with rare gentleness, because she understood the cruelty of being publicly judged while privately grieving. That memory struck him harder than William's accusations. Approving the dispersal now felt less like modernization, and more like betraying someone who had once recognized his pain. Camilla received news of Sarah's decision in silence. The queen consort closed the door to her sitting room and removed the planning folder connected to Margaret's apartment from her desk. She understood that any future use of those rooms would now carry her name, no matter who signed the final order. Her original question had become a symbol of something colder. Then the palace began to leak. One version praised William for defending royal heritage. Another accused the prince of interfering with the king's household and publicly weakening Camilla. The crisis was no longer contained. A removal contractor made the danger even clearer through a documented internal confirmation. Separate transport crates had been ordered for different destinations. The furniture had never been intended to remain together in storage. Charles rose, studied Margaret's photograph, and dictated a suspension of every order connected to the apartment. Nothing could be moved without his personal approval. Yet William remained uneasy. He told Catherine that a suspension could always be reversed. The machinery had stopped, but it had not been dismantled. To end the threat completely, William would have to speak not to the king, but to the father still carrying the memory of a difficult, beloved aunt. William found Charles after dinner, alone beside a box of family photographs. There were no red folders, no secretaries, and no household officials waiting outside with recommendations. The king held an image of Margaret as a young woman, standing behind Elizabeth with a mischievous smile. William did not mention authority. Charles did not mention protocol. For the first time since the crisis began, they spoke as two men who had watched rooms become empty after women they loved were gone. William changed his approach. The prince no longer argued about household powers, conservation policy, or who possessed the stronger signature. He explained why the speed of the removal had disturbed him so deeply. Grief, he said, was often managed through clearing, categorizing, and sealing things away before anyone had understood what was being lost. The process looked efficient. To the family left behind, it could feel brutal. Charles lowered the photograph. The king admitted that Margaret's apartment had become emotionally difficult for him. Supporting the renovation had offered an escape from that discomfort. Every untouched object reminded him of his aunt, his parents, and the entire generation that had once filled the monarchy with voices now gone. Preserving the rooms meant facing those absences again. Modernizing them had seemed easier. William then spoke about Diana. He told his father that possessions sometimes became the final witnesses to a person's unguarded life. A desk remembered private letters. A chair carried the habit of where someone chose to sit. Those objects could survive in perfect condition after being rearranged, yet lose the story that made their survival matter. Charles challenged him. The monarch asked whether every royal room should become untouchable whenever someone died. William answered no. The future king did not want the palace frozen in grief. He wanted thoughtful change, honest consultation, and a clear difference between preservation and permanent immobilization. That answer broke through the resistance. Charles finally understood that the real injury had not come from considering renovation. It had come from treating Margaret's children as names to be notified after the decision, rather than family members whose consent mattered before it. Camilla paused at the doorway just as the king admitted the original order had been wrong. William expected the queen consort to defend herself. Instead, she entered, placed the planning folder on the table, and said Margaret's apartment should no longer be considered for her hospitality initiative, the plan to create formal rooms for royal guests. Camilla acknowledged that her question had begun the chain of events. She accepted that she had failed to consider how quickly officials might act in her name. The queen consort asked to apologize directly to Sarah, not through another carefully worded palace statement. Charles reached for the pen he had set aside during their confrontation. The king signed the full cancellation, withdrew the relocation authorization, and ordered a family-led preservation review chaired by William, Sarah, and a senior curator. Before the ink had dried, an aide entered with devastating news. A national newspaper had obtained the story. The family had finally reached agreement behind closed doors. But beyond the palace gates, the conflict was about to become a national argument over memory, power, and the future of the monarchy. By sunrise, the dispute no longer belonged to the family. A newspaper appeared on stands with a full-page image of Princess Margaret seated at her writing desk beside a photograph of a red removal tag. Across the front ran the words, "William stops palace clear-out." The story spread faster than the official explanation. Outside Kensington Palace, visitors began leaving flowers beneath the gates, not for a recent death, but for a royal memory they believed had nearly been packed away before anyone could object. Buckingham Palace moved quickly. The royal institution confirmed that the relocation plan had been cancelled and described the crisis as a review of conservation and family consultation procedures. Conservation meant the careful protection of historic objects and the stories attached to them. The statement blamed no one. That silence only gave the public more space to decide who had won and who had failed. Broadcasters cast William as the defender of royal heritage. Commentators went further, asking whether the future king now carried more moral authority than Charles whenever the monarchy faced a deeply human decision. The prince disliked that framing. Watching the coverage with Catherine, he said the intervention had never been about defeating his father or humiliating Camilla. She heard the concern beneath his words. The family had only just repaired the fracture, and the headlines threatened to tear it open again. Outside Kensington Palace, the public created its own verdict. A small crowd gathered near the gates, where an elderly woman placed white roses beside an old postcard of Margaret. Her handwritten card carried one simple sentence: "A home is part of a life." Television cameras captured the message, and within hours it became the emotional symbol of the entire dispute. Camilla faced a harsher judgment. Several newspapers placed her photograph beside phrases such as "Margaret's rooms targeted." The Queen Consort read the headlines without comment, then rejected advice to delay her promised apology. Her advisors warned that meeting Sarah directly could look like an admission of guilt. Camilla replied that avoiding Margaret's daughter would look worse, and would be worse. Sarah surprised everyone. Lady Sarah Chatto issued no attack and demanded no public humiliation. Through a documented family statement, she confirmed that a preservation review had been agreed, and thanked William, Charles, and Camilla for reaching a settlement that respected her mother's private history. Her restraint changed the mood. The scandal began to lose its appetite for blame. The palace then announced that Margaret's principal furniture would remain together as a unified historic interior. Scholars could receive limited access, but the apartment would not become a commercial attraction or a private suite for another royal. After public hours, William returned with Sarah. The prince removed the final red tag from the writing desk and placed it inside the cancelled relocation file. Margaret's daughter watched in silence, understanding how close her mother's world had come to being divided beyond repair. The red tag was gone, the Vans would never return, and the final meaning of William's intervention could now be measured not by what he defeated, but by what the family chose to preserve together. Weeks later, the disputed apartment looked almost exactly as it had before the crisis. The writing desk remained near the window. The embroidered chairs faced one another. The cabinets still carried the marks of daily use. Yet something fundamental had changed. The room was no longer preserved through silence or neglected out of discomfort. It had become a conscious family decision. William had not merely blocked a relocation. He had forced the monarchy to decide what remembrance should look like. Charles approved a permanent preservation agreement keeping Princess Margaret's principal furniture together inside Kensington Palace. The agreement, a formal document governing the collection's future care, protected the desk, chairs, cabinets, and books, without destroying the arrangement that gave them meaning. The king finally accepted that conservation could not be reduced to polished wood and protected fabric. It also had to preserve emotional context. Sarah and David Armstrong Jones received formal consultative status over major decisions involving their mother's collection. That status meant palace administrators could no longer act first and inform the family later. Lady Sarah Chatto read the terms slowly, then released a quiet breath. Her brothers shared that relief. Their grief remained, but their voices could no longer be pushed aside. Charles also wrote privately to Margaret's children. The monarch admitted that the original process had failed to respect what the rooms represented. He blamed no official and hid behind no procedure. Sarah read the letter twice. The apology did not undo the hurt, but it gave her something unexpected: peace without surrender. Camilla met Sarah without advisors present. The Queen Consort apologized for asking the question that began the crisis, and for failing to understand how quickly others might act in her name. Margaret's daughter accepted. She made clear that forgiveness did not erase the wound, but it would stop that wound from defining their future. William understood the deeper victory. The prince had not shown leadership by defeating his father. He had shown it by forcing enough silence into the process for grief, memory, and dignity to be heard. Charles understood that too. Their confrontation became a model for future disagreements. Direct honesty, private vulnerability, and no demand for public triumph. William, Charles, Sarah, and Camilla gathered inside the restored sitting room. The king touched the writing desk and asked where Margaret had preferred to sit. Sarah pointed toward one embroidered chair. Charles smiled. Of course she did. That moment delivered the final verdict. William had not saved the furniture because every royal possession must remain untouched. He had saved the collection because efficiency must never erase context before memory receives judgment. And so the doors closed on a room no longer threatened by removal, not because the monarchy had rejected change, but because it had finally learned that progress means nothing when it forgets the lives that gave the crown its human soul. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.